Okay, now with the radiator hoses in and we just need to fill it with coolant. The bleed procedure for this car is to fill up the coolant and loosen the 4 ports here that you see here. So in the engine bay, there's one right on the firewall on this coolant hose coming through the firewall. There's a nipple right there. It's very easy to see. There's one that's a little bit hidden. It's right below the throttle body. This round area is the throttle body. It's right on the thermostat housing, right there. There is one in the front. Of course, the radiator bleed, which is for the Koyo, is this guy right here. And then on the front, there's the heater core pipe, which is this guy right here. So we're going to remove the cap, and there's going to be a nipple on there. So all these three are going to be pretty not too bad because you can put a hose on it. So I'm going to show you guys what I did. I grabbed this from Home Depot. It's a 5/16 inch outer diameter, 3/16 inch inner diameter, and they fit perfectly, as you can see here, on the bleeder nipple. So I have one going to the firewall and one for the thermostat, and they're going into this orange juice can. Because what you're going to do is you're going to fill up the tank and you're going to crack those open. Once the coolant comes out of those tubes or those nipples without air, that's when you can close them down. And you're going to do them in a certain order as well. So you're going to tighten the bleeders in sequence of the thermostat bleed bolt, the radiator bleed, the heater pipe bleed, and then the water pipe bleed, water pipe being the one on the firewall. So in that order, you're going to start tightening them up as you do not see any more air bubbles. So let's go ahead and remove the heater core. Okay, so once you get the cap off of this guy right here, I'm using a 1/4 inch inner diameter hose. It's a tight fit, but it just fits on there. And then you're going to want to use a 14mm wrench for the Koyo. Alright, I'm using the same 1/4 inch diameter inner diameter hose that I used on the heater core pipe for the Koyo. It's also a very tight fit, but that's what I want to do because I don't know how else you're going to know how there's a stream with no bubbles coming out of here unless you do this. So once the coolant starts coming out of here with no bubbles, I'm going to just grab the filler bolt and swap it in. Okay, next you're going to want to loosen these 2 nipples here, and they are 12mm. It's kind of hard to focus on it, but it's right there. Alright, we're going to do a few bits of preparation. We're going to try to lift up the rear of the car so it's pointing downwards. Easier said than done, but do try to do that safely. Remember that your e-brake is not on, or first gear doesn't do anything for your front wheels. So chock your front wheels, and then we're going to turn the car on, power on, and open up the heater all the way so that the heater core is open and the coolant flows through. Okay, so safety first. I originally I told you to put wheel chocks. Yes, my garage is slightly slanted, as most people's garages are, downwards to go out. So I originally put chalk on the back, 2 chocks on the back of each wheel. And then once I started jacking it up, the car started ever so slightly going forward because it's obviously pointed forward now, or pointed downwards on a forward slope. So I put 1 chalk in the front and 1 in the back, so keep it stabilized. Heater's on. Oh yeah, I forgot I had it on already. So that is on. Okay, so once again, here's the setup. I have the heater core bleeder open, cap off, the radiator bleeder off. I have the water line nipple open and the thermostat cover open. I'm going to fill the coolant tank with coolant, and hopefully coolant will start bleeding out and into these lines, and then I will tighten them in a certain order, which I believe is the thermo first. Alright, and as far as tools to bleed, I do have a vacuum bleeder, which I was going to use, but on reading up, I heard that you need a strong-ish compressor, and I only have a little donut compressor. So also, I know a lot of you viewers are not going to have this, and you're probably going to have this guy right here. So I'm going to use this one and show you guys how to do that using this common Lyle funnel that you can get anywhere. Okay, so what you're going to do is remove the radiator cap and find out which of these that you need. I've had this kit for a while, and I've had to make modifications to this one to fit into certain coil radiators. This is obviously not on the radiator, but just to note that I did taper this down, as you can see in the bottom. I tapered it and I shaved it down. So I'm not sure if this fits in here because it's tapered already or what, but you want to put it in there and have one that's going to have a nice tight seal when you tighten on the cap. I tried this one first, and or one of these first, and it wasn't tightened. Once I turned the cap actually wouldn't tighten down because it needs to have a certain amount of upward force that the cap is using to, or needs to have a certain amount of thickness that the cap is using to force down and seal with the rubber seal. So anyway, just make sure you use the right one so it's nice and solid, and then you can put the funnel on. I need to get this laid out of the way. And then this is the plunger to stop any kind of fluid. So let's go ahead and put the funnel on. Okay, let's fill it up. Okay, update. I've only put about a gallon in. Of course, I don't know how much I was empty because I didn't empty out the whole system. But the heater core started coming out first, which doesn't surprise me because that's the biggest port next to the radiator. So it's probably good to have a setup like mine just in case, because we want coolant to come out of all 4 ports before we start closing up the thermostat port first. So it looks like, if you were to just leave it open, it's just going to splooge coolant everywhere. So hopefully these holes, this is probably going to be the one where it's going to have the least seal, but nothing you can do about it. Just wash it off with water afterwards. So we're going to keep going, filling it up, and once all of them start having coolant come out with no bubbles, we'll start closing it up. Thermostat first, radiator second, heater core third, water pipe on the firewall fourth. Okay, actually, from the last clip, I didn't put any more coolant in, and I'm starting to see coolant. You can see that there's a little bit of blue. There's a little bit of blue coolant in there and a tiny bit on the firewall. So you can see bubbles coming out right now, actually. So that's a good thing. So we're just going to keep going until no more bubbles. Alright, I didn't get it on camera, but I just saw some coolant come out the radiator for the first time. What I did was I took these clamps for hose clamps and clamped off the heater hose, because like I said earlier, this has probably the least resistance besides the radiator, just because it's a really wide open nipple. And I think the radiator was the last to have coolant come through just because of how high it is. So there's nothing forcing the coolant up into the radiator though, since the water pump's not running. So what I did is I clamped that off. I poured the coolant back into the reservoir because it's pretty fresh coolant. And then saw coolant come out of here for the first time. So I think I'm going to keep that capped for now. I'm going to pour more coolant in, and that way I can bleed out the radiator next, and then hopefully more will bleed out the back as well. So that's the game plan for now. Also, there's still bubbles coming out of the thermostat housing nipple, so I can't plug that up yet. So I'm going to pour more coolant in. Okay, the tube into the radiator is working pretty good. It's holding a pretty decent, well, it's leaking a little bit now, but it was holding a decent seal. Just try to minimize a mess. So let's get more air out. Okay, so I didn't have this nipple open big enough, and that is affecting the thermostat one. So I just twisted it open a little bit more and heard a hissing. And as that hissing was happening, way more, that's when this other thermostat housing was purging out coolant. So just a note, if it's not filling, if the tube is not filling up with coolant, it might not be open enough. Okay, quick update. I am about 2.5 gallons in, and in that last clip I showed you that I was loosening up the heater, the water pipe valve on the firewall, and it made the coolant come up here and basically let out a bunch of air and sucked in a lot of coolant. And what happened was the radiator started filling up the empty bottle super quickly and overflowed into my engine bay, which is why it's all wet right there. And then I had to basically, I didn't have another one of these hose clips, so I had to plug it with this. So it's kind of plugged out of order, but I believe that it was shooting out coolant, so I believe that it's basically bled of air in this area already for now. And then I'm going to continue bleeding the rear a little bit, and then I'm going to basically probably crack these open again later on just to get any residual air out. But we'll see how that goes. Okay, so you can see here I have coolant in these hoses in the back, and the coolant won't go down anymore in the reservoir. So I squeezed the coolant hoses up front just to try to release any extra bubbles. But since both of them are capped up front, I don't think the bubbles are going anywhere until I open up the front bleeders. So what I'm going to do is put this hose in this bottle and unclamp it and see if any bubbles come out. And if bubbles do come out, then I know that maybe the radiator also needs to be bled a little bit more, but there's still air in these systems because these are kind of like high spots in the front, right? So if no air comes out, I'll tighten it back up, and then I'll tighten up the rear. So I'm going to keep an eye on this area right here after I release this. Oh, lots of air. I'm trying to regulate it. Oh, more air, more air, more air. So I'm going to go back to the reservoir and fill it up with coolant before I release it some more. Okay, I finished. I filled it up with coolant because I don't want more air to be sucked in through the reservoir. All right, so actually it's letting out right now. Oh, there's more air. Okay, I'm going to go back to the reservoir. Okay, I'm going to let it go some more. Still more air. Okay, go back to the reservoir. It's a pretty steady stream right now with no air bubbles. So I think we're about to call it good. Okay, I'm going to tighten that back up, and I'm going to put the cap back on. Okay, what I'm actually going to do now is start tightening it up in order of what the service manual says to do. So I'm going to start tightening this up. This doesn't seem to be having any more air in it, so I'm going to tighten this one up first, the thermostat housing. Okay, supposed to do the radiator second. I'm not quite sure how I want to do this. I might just loosen it a little bit, let some air out, and then tighten it back up again, and then do the heater core next. Okay, sorry about that, guys. I forgot to hit record on the last clip, so all I did was put a towel underneath this guy right here. Since this is the number 2 port that you need to tighten up, I put a towel in here and loosened it almost all the way. I left it where the plug was blocking the port mostly, and it just dribbled out coolant and hopefully dribbled out some air. And then for this guy right here, you just got to do a really quick swap. So I had the hose almost, just about ready to come off, and I had the cap right there ready to go on, and switch it, do like Indiana Jones, switch it up, and just like very little splashing. So now we're going to go to the back and tighten up the water line. So now for this one, I'm going to tighten this one up right now. Okay, there's still coolant in this, so I plugged it. I'm going to plug it, unplug it, and dump the rest in there, and it's still going to be filled up to the top here. So you need to, the manual says to fill up to the max line only. So I'm going to use a fluid pump and remove some fluid to the max line. Okay, once you get the coolant level to the max right here, you're going to crack open the thermostat bleeder and let any air out. Then you're going to close it and fill up the coolant about half a quart over whatever it's at. And then you're going to grab your cap, and you're going to install it about halfway. So this is just laying it on. This is about 60, they'd say 60 degrees. 60, this is fully tight. So you're going to only put it on like that after you fill it up a quart, half a quart, and then you're going to run the car and wait for the fan and thermostat to open, fan to turn on and thermostat to open, and then basically you're good. Top off the coolant level to max, and you should be good with all the air out. Okay, I cracked it open. I don't see any more air bubbles coming out. So I'm going to tighten it back up, and I'm going to fill the reservoir a half quart more. Okay, filling it up about a half quart. All right, I'm going to start the engine now. So yeah, once your radiator fan turns on, you are good to go, and you just need to top off your coolant if it's not already topped off. One thing to note is I did get scared because I saw coolant dripping down at a constant stream. It wasn't just like residual. And I thought maybe like a hose burst or something in the back, but what it was it's the overflow tube from the tank, because of course pressure builds up and it starts leaking out. So I had a little bit too much fluid in there, apparently. I'm not sure if it does that on if you have less, a little bit less fluid, or the perfect amount of fluid that the manual states. But in any event, mine splooged out, so I had to wash it off, and so just watch out for that. Don't get scared if that's what happens. Of course, make sure it's not your hoses. They shouldn't explode on idling. But you never know. So what I did was I wiped off all my hoses. I squeezed them to make sure that there's no coolant coming out, and there wasn't. And I finally figured out that it was the overflow tube. So anyway, that'll do it for this video. So of course, during that whole process, do not forget to check your temperature gauge. I turned on the heater full blast. That's just something that they used to tell you to do in the S2000 forums. So just to make sure that you don't overheat or to help combat overheating in case you did something wrong or have a big air bubbles or something in there. So I had my air on heat, full blast, and then I kept an eye on the temperature gauge the whole time, make sure it didn't overheat. So basically, ran it until the fan came on, and then you're good to go. So that'll do it for this video. Thanks for watching.